Hello everyone, Patrick. Into today's video, we're going to have a look at the weather next week to 10 days. In today's video, we've got cold weather on the way. The Scandinavian high that we've been talking about over the past few updates, over the past couple of weeks, is on its way. It's going to be turning winds into the east around Wednesday, and then after that, things are just going to get colder into the end of the week. It doesn't look at this stage as though we're talking about a big freeze, but it's going to be cold, and it's going to be cold enough for some snow, particularly in the east, in terms of snow showers at the end of the week and into the weekend. And then quite how long this is going to last is a little bit uncertain, but I think we might be inching more towards a prolonged spell of cold weather actually going through the middle and into the second half of February. So we could be talking about a couple of weeks of really quite cold weather coming up. I'll show you all the detail in a second. Before I get on with that, just to say about the ads, there's links articles on all the pages. Have a browse widgets and click through the links. You're going to help us page website. Thanks so much for doing that. There's also video ads on most pages which own content. When you watch it, you can close them back up again, and it does help to pay for gasofthis.com. Just starting off with the situation in the stratosphere. These are the temperatures at 10 HPA over the North Pole. So yesterday I said we probably would see a lift up in the temperature again, and that has happened. That happened yesterday. So the current stratospheric temperature is there right now. So it has warmed again over North Pole. Yesterday we went down to around there, and then we lifted back up again. So it looks like the stratospheric warming is still going on at 10 HPA, and I think this is probably about as high as it's going to get now. It'll start to drop down further towards the grey line, which of course is the average in terms of those stratospheric temperatures at 10 HPA. But it will probably cool down very gradually over the next week or two. I think this is about the peak of the temperatures at 10 HPA in the stratosphere. Things already cooling down at 30 HPA, although the warming that's going on right now might come down to 30 HPA in the next few days. So this black line might actually lift up a bit in the next day or so. But overall, I think the stratospheric warmings are now beginning to wind down. And what we're going to start looking out for is to see what the tropospheric response is. Troposphere being the layer of the atmosphere where weather is taking place. So we'll be looking out to see whether we get high pressure building over Greenland or the North Pole, and if we start to push out colder air from the pole, of course. The Arctic oscillation is actually going negative at the moment, so we're around neutral, just ever so slightly underneath neutral with the Arctic oscillation. But over the next week or two, it looks like we're going to be moving that Arctic oscillation quite a long way down into negative territory. Remember, this isn't driving anything, just tell you what the atmosphere is doing. So Arctic oscillation trending negative through into middle part of February indicates we might start to see high pressure and blocking beginning to get going over the pole, and then it'll be a case of watching to see where the cold air is pushed out, where that blocking is sitting, and who gets the cold air. Still no real sign of the North Atlantic oscillation going negative. I've been talking about this in the videos over recent days. So again, this is just index of reflecting the state of the atmosphere in the North Atlantic this time, as opposed to the Arctic, not driving anything. But we can see that the red lines here, which are individual members of the GFS ensembles, are all predicting the North Atlantic oscillation to be staying in positive territory through into the middle of February. We have got a cluster that's beginning to dip down towards neutral. None of them are going negative yet. None of them are dropping down into here where we have the Arctic oscillation going. But maybe a cluster there that's beginning to move down towards neutral. So that might be the first signs of the North Atlantic beginning to respond a bit to this stratospheric warming. But if we keep the North Atlantic oscillation positive, essentially if we keep westerlies going across the Atlantic, it'll be quite difficult to get high pressure around Greenland and going up to the North Pole and producing cold air for us. So let's wait and see where that's going to be. Keeping an eye on these charts through the coming week. Well, for the next week to 10 days, we know we've got the high pressure in over Scandinavia, so with or without blocking over Greenland and into the North Pole, it looks like it's going to be turning significantly colder with the winds going into the east via that Scandinavian high. So these are the 500 millibar height anomaly flow charts. We've got the ECMWF here on the top, and the GFS, which have a look at in a moment, is on the bottom. 500 millibars, 80,000 feet is an area in the atmosphere, high pressure, low pressure, being moved around by the jet stream running above. That's the troposphere, essentially, the tropospheric level. So red with these charts extrapolates high pressure, blue extrapolates to low pressure, and these are mean flow charts next week to 10 days. This is going to take us to the middle of February. Now, we've got quite a big difference between the ECMWF and the GFS in the placement of this ridge next week. So the ECMWF has this ridge sitting due to the east of us through central parts of Europe, and also extending a little bit towards the north, but the centre of it is across central Europe, which means that the jet stream is doing something like that. We're actually starting to pull up some milder air from the south as we go into next week with the ECMWF. However, the GFS, look at this, the high pressure is much further north. It's centred over Scandinavia, and also extending out towards Iceland as well, which means it's a direct sort of hit from the east, bringing those easterly winds through into next week. So the GFS, consequently, is a lot colder than the ECMWF this morning. The ECMWF probably would be chilly in terms of frost and fog, but the GFS is a proper easterly that starts this week, carries on over the weekend, and is still going on into next week as well. So quite a prolonged easterly with the GFS today. These are the GFS temperature and precipitation ensembles the next 2 weeks. So the red line here is the 30-year temperature average. Going to be going colder than average through this week as those easterly winds start to dig in. And then a lot of uncertainty over the weekend and into next week, this part of the chart just here, in terms of how much cold air we're going to keep going with those easterly winds, or whether we're going to draw in sort of milder upper air temperatures from the south. But because it's high pressure dominated, even these GFS ensemble members that actually go quite mild for a time early next week, they will probably still be quite cold on the surface. Actually, they'll probably still be producing frost and fog. But these are the ones we're interested in down here, because they're the ones that are keeping the air coming in from the east, and they have cold upper air temperatures as well as being cold on the surface. It's quite a complicated pattern to be describing this. I'm going to show you the charts from the GFS and the ECMWF in a moment. It's a subtle difference, but it's a big difference, because it's a difference between getting a proper easterly and cold upper air temperatures which can produce snow, and just getting mild upper air temperatures from a southerly that would still be cold on the surface from frost and fog, but wouldn't be producing snow. In terms of precipitation, so we've got rain coming up tonight. There might be a bit of snowing with that over the Northern Hills of Scotland and the Pennines, actually. After that, loads of dry weather through the rest of the working week. As we go into the weekend, early next week, we might get some precipitation coming through there, and those could be snow showers coming in off the North Sea. Temperature anomalies looking cold. These are the temperature anomalies from the 6th through to 14th of February. Colder than average, really, across the whole of Europe, actually. So from Ireland and Portugal in the west over to the Black Sea in the east, it does look pretty cold there with those temperatures. So a pretty cold week coming up for Europe this week. The precipitation anomaly from the 6th to the 14th is coming out drier than average pretty much everywhere across Europe as well, although it does look quite wet down in the Mediterranean. So here's the GFS then for Friday. We're drawing in that cold easterly wind then. We've got the high pressure in over Scandinavia. That's set up very nicely, bringing in the winds from the east. That's going to be a bitterly cold wind, and it could be bringing snow showers onto the eastern coast. Now we go into a weekend, and the GFS is maintaining winds from the east, and this is quite interesting just here. These green colours just here. That's probably some sort of upper cold pool that's coming down across England and Wales. That might enhance the snow shower risk a little bit over the weekend, particularly, but perhaps not exclusively, for eastern areas. There's a little bit of an elongation in the isobars there, indicating possibly some sort of system is coming in from the east, I say maybe enhancing the risk of sleet or snow over the weekend. Now we go into the early part of next week, and we start to turn the winds from the east to the southeast. It's a very subtle difference, but it is starting to bring up now, this wind, some slightly milder air from the south. So early next week, perhaps we import somewhat milder air from the south. I think it's still be a pretty cold and raw wind. But then as we go through to the middle part of next week, the GFS wants to get those winds back into the east again. So this is starting to bring colder air back after a couple of days of slightly less cold weather, Monday and Tuesday. It starts to turn bitterly cold with those easterly winds again, and those east winds really do come back with a vengeance into the second half of next week. And again, this is probably some sort of upper cold pool that we've got going on here with these green colours, just enhancing the snow shower risk up to day 10. And we've also got a little bit of retrogression going on as well next week. So on Wednesday, for example, the centre of the high pressure is still there over Scandinavia. But as we push through towards the end of next week, this takes us to Friday 17th of February, which is beyond day 10. But by then, the high pressure has actually moved from Scandinavia to be centred around Iceland. So we've taken the high pressure from east to west, which is called retrogression, and it's one of the things that tends to go along with prolonged cold spells. The normal flow, the zonal flow, is west to east, and the zonal flow would normally be going that way. And that's the typical way that the weather patterns evolve because of the way we rotate around the sun. So zonal is our normal setup, west to east. Retrogression is where we go against the zonal flow and take pressure system, in this case high pressure, from east to west. And I say that's normally one of the things that tells you the atmosphere is behaving very abnormally, and often it's a sign that you're going into quite a prolonged cold spell. And that is, in fact, what the GFS produces with particular runoff. The GFS, it is a prolonged cold spell, but setting up there with blocking around Greenland and Iceland, low pressure underneath it, and that low pressure will probably be bringing snow there on Saturday 18th of February to much of the country. So the GFS is implying a prolonged spell of cold weather starting this week and going on into the second half of February. These are the upper air temperatures from the GFS. So Thursday's a bitterly cold day. We've got the -10 isotherm there coming in with those east winds. We will feel very cold on Thursday, very cold on Friday as well. Into the weekend it stays cold, not quite as cold, the upper air temperatures, but certainly cold enough for snow to be occurring with those east winds if they are dragging in any precipitation. Now, I said early next week, it looks like we moderate that EC a little bit and turn the air to the southeast. So here comes some slightly milder upper air temperatures on Monday, and those spread up across the country on Tuesday. But that's not the end of the cold weather, because we go through into the middle and second half of the week, the cold upper air temperatures will come back. There's the dew points on Tuesday, showing most of Europe is freezing cold, and even over the UK, despite those mild upper air temperatures, or milder upper air temperatures, the dew points are still around or below freezing for much of the country. So even early next week, although we might moderate the cold a little bit, still looks pretty chilly really, even into the early part of next week. And as I say, the second half of next week, the cold upper air temperatures start to come back in again with a vengeance from the east. And again, there's the dew points by day 10, which is Thursday, 16th of February, looking freezing cold across most parts of Europe. The UK is importing those freezing cold temperatures in as well, and we know that beyond this it's staying cold into the second half of February. So the GFS definitely seeing a really quite a prolonged, wouldn't necessarily say at this stage severe, but certainly a prolonged cold spell of weather setting up this month if the GFS is right. But the ECMWF, we know it's going to be quite a lot milder, and this is what it's showing. Yes, the EC wind is through on Friday, so both bars in agreement for a bitterly cold easterly at the end of the week. Those EC winds stay with us into the weekend. Again, there's that upper cold pool that's across the south that might just enhance the snow shower risk over the weekend, particularly for eastern regions, and possibly coming in across more southern counties as well. So I think we will be updating Snow Watch a little bit later in the week. Maybe from tomorrow we might start to do some snow watches and see whether there is indeed going to be some snow showers in the east at the end of the week and over the weekend. I think there will be. Into the early part of next week, that's the wind beginning to turn into the southeast. That the GFS is doing, so we start to drag up some slightly milder air from the southeast early next week. But unlike the GFS, which eventually pulls winds back into the east from the middle of next week onwards, the ECMWF just pumps up southerly winds into the second half of next week, and actually even a little bit southwesterly there. So that really started dragging some very mild air up from the south and the southwest, with the high pressure, instead of the high pressure being centred up here and around here by day 10, actually the ECMWF has it centred somewhere across Germany, and that drags up that milder air from the southwest. So big disagreement there in the placement of that high pressure for next week. So it's still not totally certain that this is going to be a prolonged period of cold weather, but I've got a feeling that ECMWF is probably an outlier, and I think it's a bit on the milder side of the clusters. So maybe we'll finish up with a blend between the GFS and the ECMWF. We'll have to wait and see how that works out. What we can say with very good confidence is that we're going to be turning winds into the east from Wednesday. It's going to get very cold for the end of the week, bitterly cold, with snow showers in the east. We might enhance the risk of snow showers over the weekend. That will be one to keep an eye on. Early next week, it becomes less cold, maybe a little bit milder from the southeast. And then from the middle to the latter stages of next week and going into the second half of February, will we lock into a prolonged cold pattern? Got to wait a bit longer to answer that. But at the moment, it does look like we could be setting up quite a prolonged cold spell. Right, that's all for now. Thanks for watching.